O'Reilly. You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Hey everybody, welcome. Episode number 25 of the Hunting Collective. I'm Ben O'Brien, and today, continuing our tour of Texas as my family leaves to head north to Montana. And this tour stop is close to my home in Dripping Springs, Texas. And Russell Cunningham is our man today, and he's going to tell us about archaeology, about amateur archaeology, but about a passion for the history of his state of Texas, his home place of Dripping Springs, and his lineage, which is hunting. Here's a man who has found thousands, maybe one of the largest amateur collections of arrowheads in the United States. He has collected artifacts from around the West. He has collected paintings, and he has collected art that all point back to one place. They point back to his appreciation of history and of the cultures that led us to where we are now. Most specifically, the cultures that lived the place he's lived his entire life. He's as much a part of this land as anyone else. His family has cultivated this land over many generations. He has lived there for most of his entire life. And now he's raising his kids there. And it just so happens to be you can go pretty close to their backyard and find arrowheads that are 3,000 years old and speak to us about a culture of people that live in Texas. So, enjoy my friend Russell, his amateur archaeology career, and the collection that he has amassed that is impressive. Episode number 25. Coming at you. All right, Russell, this is your first podcast ever.
First one, virgin.
The virgin? Well, we'll get you through it. We got a lot of interesting stuff to cover, of course. But first, I always like to have people describe where we are because we have no video here. So give us a quick description of the room we're sitting in. So be as detailed as you please because there's a lot of stuff in here.
Well, we're in my dream home on the ranch I grew up on. The room was planned to be the Indian room. And so growing up, all the artifacts that I had been finding, I had a dream of putting them in a room, which would be someone's similar to a study, but
yeah,
I've done all the studying I need to do. So it's all the walls have either great big mule deer or pre-reservation bow and arrow quivers, arrows with trade points, lots of arrowheads that we found on the ranch, lots of stones, grinding stones, a couple of old bison heads that predate the bison, and mainly just artifacts that my family and I have collected over the years.
Yeah. Would you label yourself an artifact collector, or how would you label yourself as in general in that space?
Yeah, I guess an amateur archaeologist of sorts, but yeah, a collector, definitely. I just can't get enough of the prehistoric hunter.
Is that what drove you to collecting? I mean, would you call it a collection or more just an exploration of, one, the place you live, this ranch, which is beautiful, but two, just kind of that connection, like you say, to our ancestors?
Yeah, both. I mean, I love to collect. I like to show people what we find, what we're looking for out here, what we're seeing. There's so few people that actually get to experience what we get to experience. And my kids are 6 and 9, 2 girls, and they found more arrowheads than most men will ever find. And we're just in it so deep. It's just a passion that I have, and it's the same passion that I have for hunting. It's hard to describe unless you're a true hunter yourself.
Well, I think when you see what's in front of us on this table, or hopefully I'll let folks get a good look at the way that you dig, what you dig for, but then at the same time, how you display it and the reverence with which, I mean, in this room, you're displaying the things you've found. And we were talking before this, I grew up, my dad and I relic hunted my entire childhood. And he had the same kind of way of displaying his finds. It was mostly Civil War era artifacts and things. But the same reverence that you could see sitting in this room, you can tell by the way you've displayed the things you found, the reverence you have for it, and how important it is to you that it's appreciated. It's evident in these displays.
Well, thank you. A lot of time has gone into finding the points, and then, like you said, just the way they're displayed. I almost want people to think when they come in here to be able to put themselves back 5, 6, 8,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And to look at each point and wonder where that point's been, who made it, the weather that was going on at the time, and the struggles that those peoples that were having at the time that or not struggling. I mean, the people probably had it a lot better than we did in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah, each piece, I mean, as you take him, we'll go through kind of how you came to be an amateur archaeologist and how you came to be on this piece of land. But we went for a little ride to look at one of your sites where you're currently finding arrowheads. And it is clear to me that all those things are relevant to you. When you find a piece, the first thing you said to me when I picked up my first arrowhead over there was, the last time somebody had their hands on that was probably 3,000 years ago. And that's something I hope it's not lost on me. And I'm even looking around here, I'm geeking out and want to ask questions about every little piece of stone that you got here. And so I hope everybody listening to this can realize the amount of history that is built into hunting, the amount of history that is built into what we're doing. It's built in our genetic code, for lack of a better way to describe it. And so, yeah, this being, even for your little girls to grow up in a place where they're so connected to 3,000 years prior is really unbelievable to me. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, just to find out why or how you got here. Maybe you don't even know why, but how you got to this point in your life.
Well, I think if anyone had the opportunity, I think all hunters would be in this room geeking out over this, and they'd probably have a room just like it if they had that opportunity. And you and I were talking about earlier that my philosophy in life is to get off the couch. You can't do all this if you're sitting on the couch. But the DNA that we share with these ancient hunters is what drives us, and everyone shares it. Whether it comes out more so in others is evident. It certainly does, but I can't imagine just seeing where these people lived and picking up an arrowhead and not just being completely intrigued with what went on 5,000 years ago in this area and what was each specific style of point made for. Some of these points are 7 inches long and some of them are 7 millimeters long.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, the variances in all the heads that you have here and all the artifacts, but just the variances in the people and the way they lived by generation of hunter, by type of people, by where they lived. It's unbelievable. I mean, you've got arrowheads here that are the size of quarters, and then you've got points here that are as long as, for lack of a better term, like a Snickers bar, as long as one of those, but 6 inches long. And so every one of these pieces, I think, is an answer to a question, or at least some evidence that'll help you answer a question that we all should have, which is how did this happen? It's, I think, maybe foolhardy, or it's some fool's errand to try to compare our modern hunting to this in a direct way. It's so far removed.
Right.
These ancient hunters are so far removed from us, but they have so much to teach us that, we could talk about this all day. But take me through how you came to be on this land, your family's history, and then we'll start talking about some of these really interesting pieces.
So when I was about 10, we moved out because our little farm out in Round Rock, Texas, which is north of Austin, town kind of got a little close, so we decided to move further out, and we found this area out southwest of Austin in the hill country, Dripping Springs area. We were able to, it was so far out back then, it was just a big, bunch of cedar. And so we were able to get this ranch and have, over the last 30 years have been improving it, removing cedar, developing the springs. And as we've been doing so, it wasn't long after. I was about 11 years old when we found our first true mound, is what we call it. It's an Indian camp, and started finding points and have been just completely taken by the thought and the chase and the what's next, what's behind the next rock, and what am I going to find next, and what were these Indians doing, and the whole deal. And so the ranch is about 700 acres, and we have almost a mile of Barton Creek running through. We have both sides of Barton, and then every several hundred yards there's a feeder creek that's spring fed. So it's just the perfect environment to camp nowadays, and back then for these Indians to survive. They had great water, and that's the key is the water source. And we're on near the Edwards Plateau, and in the bison were roaming through here. Probably not as much as a little south of us because it's a little more hilly, but they had lots of deer. They had plenty to eat. And, every site that we find is just a beautiful campsite that we'd want to hang out in. Yeah. Great cover and just beautiful big old trees. And so the family's had this place for 30 years or so, and that's what we do. We hunt, we fish, and we look for arrowheads, and we found a lot of them. Thousands of them.
I would say, how many total you think you found in your lifetime?
Oh, upwards of 5,000, I would imagine.
On this property?
Between here and within 5 miles of here. I get people that'll call me and have sites that we'll look at. But
have you ever took stock at your entire collection or the family's collection as to how big it is, or where it ranks in the list of biggest arrowhead collections or most stylish?
There's a huge subculture. Now that we've gotten into it, I've gotten to know some of the people that have the biggest collections of perishables, cave finds in the nation, and my family and I have been able to see their private collections, which the Smithsonian wants lots of the pieces that they have. Yeah. And frankly, most of the private collections have the best stuff. But as far as an amateur, I've probably certainly have one of the biggest collections in this area.
Sure.
But just because there's it's hard work finding these.
Yeah.
And there's not many people that'll get off the couch or get out there and get it done.
Get off the couch. Yeah. I mean, you started hunting and finding arrowheads around the same time when you were a kid. I mean, it was all just what you did.
Yeah, that's what my brother's 2 years older than I, and we would be, like most kids then. Nowadays, it's a different story, but we would be gone at sun up. We'd either be riding horses or we'd be digging arrowheads, and Dad would pretty much know where to find us. He'd either we'd be down there digging, or if the horses were gone, he'd see us at dark, But yeah, so that's lots of time spent, and it's great family stuff. I mean, my brother and I have great memories digging, and now my little girls and my wife love it. The girls are making mud pies, and my wife is combing through the dirt with me, and it's a neat deal.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. To see the work you put into it. I mean, it's easy to come into a room like this and kind of feel the artistry of it, your own artistry in creating the presentation of the stuff, but the artistry of the folks that made this so many generations ago. It's easy to see that, but then we go out to your dig site, to your mound, and you see all the work you put in the Texas summertime. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's hot, man. It is hot, and we come back just drenched, but each point is just.
You ever sat down and had a whiskey in this room? Thought, why, really why? You know why. It's fun. It's we could talk about why, but why the passion is so.
Yes, it gets pretty deep in here. I'll come and sit in here with those that are as passionate as you are about hunting, and that's when it gets neat. Is when we start thinking about, why are we here? In a sense, we're here to serve the Lord. That's one reason. But why do we have cars and these guys were banging out flint? I mean, they were hard workers, and I can't imagine living like they did, but I think that they probably had it easier than we do.
Yeah.
But why were they here, and why so many points? Why did they lay this perfect point down that has not a scratch on it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, each one of these, we're both holding arrowheads now. And I wanted to, because you could just look at this, and each little piece of it, each detail, tells something about someone, somewhere. And if you let it speak to you, I'm sure it does. And so I imagine I knew the answer to that question, but for folks listening to think about why you're out there on a Sunday afternoon sweating your balls off,
right.
digging for arrowheads. What does it mean at the end of the day?
Yeah, what gives me the drive to go? I mean, it's not gold. These things.
No.
Someone may come in and offer me a hefty chunk of change, but it wouldn't. It'd be essentially getting paid 50 cents an hour for all the hours I put into it. I mean, they're priceless to me, but they're not really worth all that much.
What about
money.
your dad? Does he get after it pretty good with you?
Dad loves to see it and talk about it and sit in here and have a tea or something, and look at it, and he feels that the gravity of it, and he can feel the culture, but he'd rather not go dig in the heat. He never has really cared much I don't think he's ever found an arrowhead.
Oh, really?
But it's cool because he gets to live that through us. So essentially he doesn't have to. He can have a cold beer and not sweat and still get the same enjoyment out of it.
That's smart.
Yeah.
That's smart. So we kind of, we know what you're doing here, and we'll just talk more about why. But how? I mean, when you're 11, you find an arrowhead. It's cool, right? You pick it up. That's cool. Arrowhead. Take me through how you have gotten to the point where you're out there with a giant sifter and a cat, and you're digging. How big was the site we were just at?
I was probably 100 yards by 60 yards.
And how deep will you dig when you dig?
We'll get through about 5 feet. Average, I'd say. So that's a lot.
That's a lot of earth moving. So take me through how you get. Obviously your passion will lead you to this extreme way that you do it, but it takes you through that. So
when I was a kid, finding them and digging, the excitement of really, I was like, I really would like to know who made this and all, but really it's like, how many can I get? I'm going to come home with 10. And see what kind of different shapes. I knew nothing about the cultures. The shape of the base kind of tells you what culture it is, how old the point is. Like the Clovis has the flute in it. We don't have any Clovis on the ranch, but I'm sure they're here, but we hadn't found them. But then, as I got older, started reading more about it, going to the shows, and learning about how they cooked and what they ate, how they actually hafted or put the point onto the stick in the shaft, and the atlatl versus the bow and arrow, and really getting into digging deep and reading and getting with the bigwigs in the culture of this artifact hunting, and learning so much more about it. And the more I know now, the more I want to get out in the field and see the evidence of this. Yeah. And so we were talking about how they cooked, and in this country, they would cook a lot like the Mexicans cook cabrito. They'd dig a big hole, build a big fire, coals on it, put in big stones, and then cover it with grass, acorns, then grass, and then cover that with dirt and let it cook for up to 72 hours. And they'd come out and the rocks would be broken up in what's called midden. And over the different cook cycles, it would just build a big mound of broken rock. And so the sites are a lot easier to find in this country than they are in North Texas, or than they are in Arizona or Colorado or East. And so it's not as hard to find the sites. And so once we find the site, then we can we know where most of the points are, and we can kind of go to them and see what they've been eating. Lots of bison bones, lots of coon, fox, coyote jaws, rabbits, all kinds of neat stuff.
It's unbelievable. Is there, as you go through your collections and as you started to gather more things and wanted to travel, was there a want to just continue to stay here and find out more about these people, or go out into other parts of the country and, connect the dots to the ancient hunters that were here, or the ancient hunters that might have been in New Mexico or Arizona or wherever?
I'm always looking to expand my knowledge base on the different cultures. We can call them tribes in the historic sense, and then the cultures go back beyond the prehistoric. But every time I go hunting, I take one of these arrowheads with me, and I go a lot of places hunting, and I talk to the guides, and all of them it seems there's some sort of connection that they're artifact hunters.
Yeah.
And the culture out in New Mexico, the pottery makers, the Mimbres culture is very intriguing to me. And for these guys to be making these beautiful pots 1,000 years ago is just amazing. And the little earrings the shell earrings that I've found in some of their ruins while we're elk hunting, and the big, huge pottery shards that just tell a story of its own. These guys were trading shells and all from the West Coast, and some caves that I've been in West Texas, finding some amazing stuff, braided rope, and
those sandals that are on the wall there, amazing.
1,000-year-old sandals that we're finding in pack rat nests, and
unbelievable.
They're all tied. I mean, these cultures, that's the Castile culture there out of the caves in West Texas. They're about 1,100 years old. These guys are communicating and trading and with the Indians in our country. I would certainly imagine, and we do see proof of that. They're trading conch shells from the Texas coast all the way up here, but the shells that we see traded from California coast all the way here to Central Texas, it's just amazing how that makes it the network. So they're all tied.
Yeah, it tells you so much. I mean, I'm sure it all comes back to this piece of ground for you, though, just because you spent so much time digging here. And the site that we went to today, it was interesting to me how you identified where the arrowheads might be or where the artifacts might be. So take people through how you walk on a barren piece of ground in a creek and on your ranch in Texas, and how you come to know that there's relics or artifacts there. And then once you've determined that in your mind, how you find them and then continue to find them, and how you sift through to find the ones you want, and what that process looks like.
So I get this question a lot is, well, I don't even know. I've got this place on my land and I just want to know if there's an arrowhead out there. And really what it comes down to is to find a spring, a healthy spring. That the best time to find a really healthy spring is during a drought. And if that's still running, then you could almost picture the Indians being there.
Yeah.
And so we'll find a spring first, and then from the spring we'll just make a big walk. We'll just walk around and we'll look for those pieces of broken midden rock, and that's evidence of them having cook sites there, and broken flint. And if you can find a little piece of that, then we'll dig some test holes. And if the test holes bring up more midden rock and more pieces of flint, then at that point we know that we're on a site, and then we'll clear it, get all the cedar off, because the cedar in this country is everywhere. And then once we know that that's where we're going to dig, then we have come a long way. I used to just hand dig everything, and now we have a table that has a motor on it, and it's an offset drive shaft that we engineered through the help of Jimmy Lovejoy, my digging buddy. And we'll go around the midden where they would probably been living. The midden is more where they're cooking. There's going to be a lot of points in there, but the good stuff that's not broken is going to be out where they're actually living and working. Generally, it'll be on the southeast side because the prevailing winds are southwest.
Sure. So
they're going to be out of the smoke, and we'll start there and we'll just trench. We'll dig a big trench, and then we'll find the habitation layer. And when we were looking at it earlier, the snails would come in and get the organic matter after the Indians had left. And so there's generally a line of occupation is what we call it. And once we find that, we'll go below that and another 6 inches so we're not missing anything, and we'll dig that whole area one bucket at a time with a bobcat, put it on the table, it sifts. We sift all the midden rock and all out, and then we'll find the points from there, and then we'll put them in a bucket, and at the end of the day, we'll put them out on the back of the tailgate of the truck and have a cold beer and talk about. Every time we'll talk about what were these Indians doing, and wow, we're actually getting to do this. The first people that have touched this in 5,000 years, and we'll have that discussion over a cold beer, and we'll sort the points out. The broken ones will go in a box, and the whole pretty ones will be displayed for everyone to see.
Do you imagine that? One thing that struck me, you've got a nice ranch here. Do you imagine that your place is much different than every other ranch in this part of the country with open ground, that you've just over the time known what to look for and become passionate, and that's why you found the amount of heads you have? Or is, you said there's water that runs through your place for sure, but you imagine that there's so many of these sites, so much of this information that we could glean and probably should glean in some way, that just goes unfound because there's no one to see it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, even there's so many of these sites, about every 600 yards in this country, down Onion Creek or Barton Creek, and these are some of the bigger creeks in the region. The Barton Creek runs all the way down into Austin. But there's so many of these sites that if you have a property with a spring on it, you do have a campsite on it. But a lot of these camps that I'm digging, I've known about for 30 years, and I'm just coming up. I'm talking to the landowners, and I'm showing them my Indian room. I bring them out to the ranch, and they see what's there, and then they still won't dig it. And I'll ask, maybe, well, I'll dig it with them, and then I'll give them 50% of the points. So lots of people have the middens or the camps on their place, but it's a matter of want to and drive. They get out there and dig for an hour, and it's hot, and it's a ton of work, and they're over it.
Yeah.
And I can't get over it. It's like Steve Ranella or Ben O'Brien climbing to hunt. Yeah. It's like the big one, the big animal is not killed right off the road. The big one's killed back in there where no one else wants to go. And then when you get further back there and it's the last day, and if you just have enough energy to get over one more mountain range or one more mountain, that's where the big one is.
Yeah.
And it's the last day and the last hour and the last light. And I guarantee you that Ben O'Brien and Steve Rennell are up there with their glasses until last light. And that's what it's like for me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's what strikes me about all people that, you don't sit in a room like this without having some ridiculous passion for the thing.
Right.
You just don't. And you don't come to the point you've come to as an amateur archaeologist. I love that term.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there because they're great and they're super friendly and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Yeah, I think I'm like an amateur whiskey taster.
There you go. Right.
I got a certificate one time.
Yeah.
But you don't get to that point without having that drive, without wanting to know that. And you were talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, there's in some circles there's thought that digging this could be controversial because you may disturb some kind of evidence that could be found, or talk about that a little bit. I know that's probably a sensitive subject for you, but I think it's important for people to hear, your passion is coming through in this stuff and the respect for these artifacts and the fact that they're seen by many people that come in your home. I think that's important for people to know, because I know there are probably some that would ask, why don't you just leave them in the ground?
Right. And it's a non-renewable resource, essentially. And the archaeologists are amazing. That's what I wanted to do as a kid, when I was 10 or 11. But, my path went a different direction. But it is extremely important to know what went on and how it went on. But the archaeologists in this region have studied it so extensively that these camps are very common, and they don't want, they don't have any more use to come find out what they already know. Lots of their stuff gets displayed appropriately, which is awesome. And But there's tons of it that they're still studying and that the general public will never see, ever. And a lot of these folks won't even make it to a museum to see it. So the amount of people that have been in this room or been to the ranch and have looked and talked about this stuff would never have done it without this stuff coming up out of the ground and by me getting it out. And I feel it's so important for us to dig this stuff up and to share with the world, like we're doing now. I've never heard a podcast on arrowheads.
Me either. I'm sure they're out there. A lot of podcasts.
So
maybe not. Maybe we're breaking ground. I'm glad if that's the case. But yeah, no.
But they're getting displayed. We're talking about it. We're sharing this part of our history with the world. Whereas, the archaeologists do a tremendously great job about putting the word out and showing what's going on in museums and all, but it's hard to get to.
Yeah, you couldn't get to this. I mean, the amount of things that you have here and some of the great finds that you have. And that's a good segue. It brings us to, what you have and what you've learned, because there's a lot that you've learned. We got a dog visitor here bringing us a ball to throw. What you have and what you've learned, because you've learned a lot about these ancient cultures. You've learned a lot about these periods in time that are important for us all to know about. So the biggest part of me wanting to sit down with you was to harvest and get out of you all the things that you've learned about not only how to find these things and why you might do it, but the people. You sitting and having that beer, that's a good visual for everybody. Looking at these heads and in your own mind with your own knowledge, trying to understand what this connects to, because we all have that connection. So take me through the types of people that lived here, how far back, let's probably start with the oldest civilizations that lived here that you're aware of, and then take me back through kind of how that all steps up and what you've learned. That could be a big question, I know. There's
certainly evidence in this area of the Clovis culture, which was thought to be the oldest culture in North America. So whether they came across the land bridge or they came from Europe bouncing down through across the ice cap to the East Coast, there is a huge area on the East Coast with tons of Clovis camps. And so some archaeologists think that they came across in boats to the East Coast, and then that's why there's so many camps over there. And then from there, they followed the waterways west. And the other ones say that they came across the Bering land bridge, came down and followed the rivers, and then they ended up on the East Coast and they couldn't go anywhere else. And that's why there's so many camps there. But from there, the Clovis culture died out. Okay. The Paleo Indians died out, the Folsom and all that group. And then they repopulated, and there's evidence in this area that after the repopulation, the transitional paleo and all, about 8,000 years, they lived here all the way up until the Comanches. So the culture that we're finding the most of, the prehistoric, about 6,000 years till all the way up through the Comanche points, true arrowheads. So they were using what we call dart points. They were hafted to a long shaft and hurled with an atlatl. And
describe an atlatl for those who are not aware.
So it's like the chuck it deal that you throw to your dog.
Yeah, that's a good. I've never described it that way.
And so these Indians made that. They didn't make the billions of dollars that this chuck it guy is, right? I mean, why didn't I think of that? But so it's a long shaft. At the end, the flint point is on a stick about 6 inches long. That goes into the shaft. And then the stick, the atlatl, is about 1 foot long, and it has a little hook on the end, and it's you use it to hurl to get more kinetic energy. When the shaft hits the animal, the point stays in the animal, the big shaft comes out, and they run, grab their shaft, pick up another tip and put it in and just follow and track. And they can be accurate. The guys that do it now for fun can hit targets at 100 yards with these things.
Wow.
So they figured that these hunters that did it every day growing up, their whole lives, they needed to be good at it, could be accurate to 100 yards.
Do you know how they would fashion the shaft or what wood?
Yeah, they would, they'd use a lot of the cane along the rivers and creeks. And to straighten them, they'd heat them in the fire, and then they'd just bend it. And then as it cooled, they would stay in that shape. And then from there, they would use asphaltum to connect the flint tip. And asphaltum is, it's either they could use tree sap or you can, what I think of asphaltum is when you're on the beach and there's those big tar balls that come up, and that's natural. I'm sure there's more of it since we've been, digging or drilling, but they'll use that, heat it up, and then fasten that. And as that cools, that becomes hard. And so that there's no getting it off at that point. So if they broke the tip of the arrowhead, they could re-sharpen the arrowhead while it's still on that stick. And we see evidence of that in all of these points, re-sharpening. But oftentimes if that stick broke, then that point's useless at that point because they couldn't repair it.
Yeah.
So lots of these points just laying around. I'm sure a lot of that had to do with it. Why would they just leave these perfect points in camp?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier. It's probably another rabbit hole. Why are so many of them left behind in the way that they are? And I'm sure there's lots of reasons.
And they're perfect.
Yeah.
Weight, I think we talked about, it's one of them. The Folsom peoples were some of the most nomadic paleo folks, and because of that, their points were super thin, and they think it's just because of weight. But back to where we were going with that is, so it started with the Paleo Indians right here. There's paleo sites all through North America. Paleo, the Clovis, the Folsom, Angostura.
So were those all intermingled civilizations, or did they predate each other?
They were. They came. I don't think that they were overlapped very much. There'd be a culture here, and then there'd be some overlap, and there would be someone with a better technique, and they'd transition into that technique of napping, of flint napping, which gets us to from the atlatl to the bow and arrow.
Yeah, when did describe that transition as you know it in this country, at least?
So they're thinking roughly 1,300 years ago is all with the bow and arrow. Yeah, so the majority of the history of our world is atlatl. Is guys throwing big long shafts with an atlatl.
Yeah, if you Google atlatl, you can get many, many videos of modern guys, like you said, throwing atlatl. It's pretty impressive to watch.
I mean, they're killing mammoths with these things, which is just amazing to see. But then once the bow and arrow took over, there was an overlap, I'm sure, of when to use an atlatl and when to use a bow and arrow. But and some of the arrows I have in the Indian room here are really short. They have trade points on them. This is the horse culture. So then we transition from the atlatl to the bow and arrow about 1,300 years ago. And then we get into the horse culture, the horse culture is very young. It's only a couple hundred, not even that long. When the Spanish came in, there were horses and Mustangs here well before the Indians figured out how to use them. So some of the tribes didn't have horses longer than 80 years before we came and wrecked their world
in many ways.
But and I'm very sympathetic to that. It just is what it is. Progress is progress, and the Indians did it to themselves, and we don't want to rabbit hole down that. But from the bow and arrow pre-horse culture, which was a big, long thing, to the horse culture, these arrows aren't but about 2.5 feet long. Yeah,
dude, and we're looking at a set of 8 or so arrows from that time frame. And describe, how that sets up, because this, of all the things you have hanging here, I believe it was the most interesting to me how not only the feathers they used, how they affix the feathers to the shaft, how they affix the shaft to the point, what the point looks like, and why it looks like it does.
So the French were making trade points. The arrows that we're looking at now have metal trade points, and they're the style. I have a couple arrows there from the Sioux culture that are the style of Little Bighorn. Doesn't mean that these were used at Little Bighorn, but they were certainly obtained from the Indians that fought in and around Little Bighorn right at the same time.
Yeah.
So, but that's 1870s. Back in the 1700s, the French trappers, the French would make these trade points before they'd even come over here, and they'd send them with their trappers and their fur companies, and they'd trade these points to the Indians, which were, that a lot lighter. They were more accurate. They were as deadly, and they wouldn't have to put the time in to make these. Every time you throw one of these, it'd break. If it hit a rock, it'd break, and that's a tremendous amount of time that they'd put into that. Well, these points, they might bend, or they just bang it out and straighten it out and go on. So the points here we see are about 3 inches long and very sharp and wicked looking. I mean, you walk in the room and you can see these on an Indian's back.
Oh, yeah. The tip, the very tip of a knife almost.
Yeah.
This probably about, 4 inches long, would you say?
Yeah. And so the shafts of these arrows all have different designs in them, and they think that they belong to the guy who made the shaft. Or is it to let the blood out when it sticks in the animal? It's hard to say, but they have grooves in the shaft. Every one of these authentic arrows do. If you guys are at the museums and you see these authentic arrows, you look for that. But then the feathered part is about 8 inches.
Yeah.
Different cultures use 3 feathers. Some cultures just use 2. Most of them have 3 feathers, but the Navajo, I've got 3 arrows up there from the Navajo culture, and they're used buzzard feathers. They use buzzard feathers, so they're pretty easy to distinguish which tribe by the style.
Yeah.
The Sioux would use turkey and eagle. We don't have it. It's illegal to have any type of eagle feathers, so there's no eagle feathers. All the museums and have the eagle stuff.
Yeah.
You can't even trade them.
Yeah. No, that's one of the more interesting. When you look at these arrows, you think of our modern day arrows and the length, and you look at these arrows, you must think on horseback, once these horse cultures became prevalent, they had, what'd you say, 60-pound draw weights?
Yeah, up to 50, 60
Yeah,
pounds.
they're shooting a 1.5 foot long arrow, tip to tip.
Yeah.
As I'm just guessing at that, obviously. But, talk about that. Do you know much about the physics of that, of how they designed these bows and arrows and what they became in these early stages?
Well, they evolved from the utility of being on the horse, shooting under the neck. These guys were warriors. The arrowheads that we're finding on the ranch, they weren't, and there's evidence. When the archaeologists find the skeletal remains, there's no evidence of warfare. There just weren't enough of them. They needed each other. The Indians that we're talking about, the horse culture, were major warriors. There were so many of them at this point in history. And to shoot under a horse's neck, to hide, and to carry a shield and shoot while you're running, the bows and the arrows had to be super short. And, they could get right up next to a bison. They just did. They'd run in. They think that it average took about 4 arrows for every bison.
Wow.
They'd come in and shoot behind. They'd run in behind and shoot them from the flank up through the liver and maybe catch a lung. And then they had the luxury of tracking. They'd just pull up and track them. And so they didn't have to be accurate up to 80 plus yards.
Well, if we go back to, the archaic period and some of these back to away from times when bows became prevalent, what game were they hunting? What were their main sources of food, and what were the options? Maybe animals that were here that they were unable to hunt, or more unsuccessful, because I'm sure there were, deer and other species that were important.
Yeah, lots. So we find lots of bones of turkeys,
Mm-hmm.
lots of turkey legs. We're looking down at a pot from the Paladura Canyon that came out of there back in the 60s, but lots of turkeys, armadillos, find a lot of armadillo shells, the bones in them, coons, fox, coyotes, lots of deer, and a lot of buffalo. We find lots of buffalo teeth and big, huge buffalo femurs.
Yeah, that's some of the more amazing stuff you're showing me too. Not this, I geek out about almost everything you've shown me thus far with buffalo teeth for whatever reason. Ancient buffalo teeth.
It's so awesome when that rolls out. It's so cool. It's because we think the deer and stuff around here, and we just can't picture bison here. And
no.
If you can imagine, this country is right now. It's so wooded. Back then, there were very few trees, and mainly around the springs and the creeks and all, because of the natural fires, and the bison herds would come through here. And so to hear that, there used to be bison here, and the Indians were actually digging them and finding the evidence that, they were cutting up bison right here. We'll find parts of the camp that they would probably be the butchering the bison. We'd find lots of big knives, and that's where the big bison bones are. The knives, I say big, anywhere from 5 to 7 inches long.
Do you find any evidence of how they might have butchered a bison with these tools?
Yeah, we see in some of these big bones, there's chop marks on them. And then there's some of these big chopper rocks. I mean, imagine just a big, huge piece of flint that's napped on one edge, so it's very finely worked, and then the back end is thick.
Explain what napped is, just kind of refined.
So for napping is when they actually take a blank piece of flint and using a hammerstone, they chip off the flint, and on each side they'll turn it back over and chip it, make it to where it's sharp, and then once it has a pretty good shape to it, then that's called percussion flaking. Then they'd come back in and do what's called pressure flaking, where they take an antler tip generally and just hold a lot of pressure at a certain angle, and it pops off little pieces of flint, where you can get a piece that's as sharp as any knife.
Yeah.
So there's evidence of them, butchering bison right there, deer and bison. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Teeth, big old bison jaws coming out.
In this country. I mean, we are sitting here, half an hour from downtown Austin, Texas?
Yep.
And you found evidence of thousands and thousands of year-olds hunters that are butchering bison.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So everything about that, when I have a chance to go down to dig with my family or by myself or whatever, it's like, what are we going to find today?
Yeah. What piece of, I don't know, it would be hard to describe what you're really finding. Because you could say, the prevailing term might be like, hey man, you find pieces of history. I don't know if it's that. If it's more or less you're finding evidence of who we are, or evidence, every little piece is just another piece in the puzzle.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You've killed deer on this ranch, and you've butchered deer, yet hundreds of yards from where a ancient hunter, and ancient is the term. I mean, we're looking at a book where one of your blades was featured as the archaic period, an archaic blade from 2000 BC.
Yeah.
Found here, correct?
Yeah, right here on the ranch.
That's got some gravity to me,
it's
even
huge.
Being here with you.
It's huge gravity, and most people are like, oh, that's cool. I like the shape of that. That's an arrowhead. And it does not go beyond that.
Yeah.
And they walk in this room and I don't know, we talked about this earlier, if that was our discussion, but they would rather know about the furniture.
It is nice furniture. I'll give you that.
It's old stuff.
It's really nice. But there's no, unless it belonged to King Arthur, I'd be looking at these heads. And That's an interesting distinction, and moreover, I mean, we could talk about these cultures forever, and we'll continue to do so. But what's that say about our culture? What's that say about what we value? And I think you and I are both hunters, and that's probably I self-identify as like a family man, a lover of the natural world, a hunter. Like that's what I would try to describe myself as if anyone asked. Yeah, I'm sure you would say similar things.
Well, it's what culture do we have here?
Yeah.
Frankly,
Yeah.
We go hunt in Spain, or we go hunt in Russia, or we go hunt in Nepal. That's culture.
Yeah.
I mean, we're staying in a 500-year-old bed and breakfast while we're hunting great Osibex, or we're in a village and getting, of history from these villagers that in Nepal and the Himalayas, that have been there. When wasn't that village y'all went to? It was like 4 generations or 5 generations.
Yeah, many more than that even, I think. Another rabbit hole to go down was how the weight of that I felt there trying to learn. I felt like almost I could have stayed there my entire life and not learned everything I needed to learn from those people. Not only about the history of their place, but who they were and how they lived their lives. I'm sure that you feel that same way about holding one of these arrowheads.
Yeah, it's awesome. But and what's cool about it is there is culture. This is culture. Now, our society has, I feel, ashamed of the fact that we're losing it. We don't care about it. All we care about is what's on the next iPad video game deal. And you know me, I don't even have a Facebook page or Instagram, so I don't even know how I'm going to listen to this.
I'll Dropbox you a file.
Dropbox. That's another thing I don't know.
Well, you'd be the first person to know on this podcast that didn't have one of those. So that's really nice. That's nice for me. But yeah, I mean, it just goes to show, like you said, what is our current hunting culture? I mean, we didn't come here to talk about that, but I love doing that anyway. Because culture is just shared ideas. That's what culture is. It's the definition of the damn thing.
Yeah.
Is a collection of shared ideas that reverberate through a people. And the cultures that we, maybe because we're so far removed from it, my respect for what you've amassed here is immense, just because of what it means to our own culture, but just to what it means to our humanity. It's crazy to see.
Thank you. It's so awesome to put this deal together and to have people that are passionate enough about it to come and actually want to talk about it. And it's amazing to get to raise my family on the ranch, and for them to have some semblance of culture instead of being stuck in.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter. You can live in town and have an amazing culture and be more country than someone living out on the ranch. But whatever, it's just a neat way to do it. And
well, there's, like I said, there's perspective in these artifacts that are that's invaluable, that I think every hunter should have. So, I mean, are there places, I'm not going to have everybody come to your house, but are there places around where people can, that you feel like are key?
Yeah.
You can say Smithsonian, do all that, but are there key places where, man, if you're road tripping through Texas, if you're coming through this country, if you want to understand the ancient hunting culture, which is key to our own, hunting lives just in this area, in Texas and West Texas, even more.
There's one of the biggest paleo campsites ever known in North America is called the Galt site. And it's north of Georgetown, Texas.
Yeah.
And UT gives tours of the Galt site. And that's where they found lots of Clovis stuff. And that's where they're talking about this, 15 to 17,000-year-old culture that was here before the Clovis. Clovis was thought to be here 12.5 to 13. But this Galt site is somewhere you can take the kids, or if you don't have kids, if you're passionate about it, just go learn about it. It's amazing. It's one of the places you can go. There's also guys that have pay digs, is what they call them, where you can go online and find a privately owned ranch that, it costs $20 to go out there with a pick, and you can dig around and find points of your own. Which, if you don't own a place or have friends that own a place, it's awesome. It's the next. There's people who have huge collections that have done this.
Yeah. How would you if say I got a property and I find a beautiful point like the one on beautiful flint point, like the way one I'm holding. Is this flint? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I'm getting good. The rock identify. Stone identify. How I find this point and I want to know more about how it came to be here and a lot of the information you're saying. What are ways that I could find?
There's that book.
Oh yeah.
There's several books.
Yeah. Get that one out. Yeah, take it off. Yeah. We're gonna start reading passages from Arrowhead books now. Get really deep. Go real deep. Oh yeah.
So this Overstreet book
this weighs about.
It's the best one.
It weighs about as much as 3,000 arrowheads might weigh.
And then there's areas of the book, South Central or wherever part of the United States you live, and it's going to show you what your point is. You compare the base of it, you find it, it'll tell you how old it is, probably how much it's worth.
So this is the Overstreet Identification and Price Guide to Indian Arrowheads, 12th edition, Robert M. Overstreet, and it is 1,264 pages long. Looks like there's a few ads in there, so we'll give it 1,200 pages long, and it's detailed.
Yeah, it's the dictionary of what we do, and it's a lot of how. That's the first one that I went to.
Yeah.
Yeah, growing up.
Fine. So if I found this head that's in my hand, how would I go about looking through here?
So we live in the South Central area.
Yep.
Right there. Let me see what type of point that is. That's a Bulverde. So if you go to look up Bulverde, and then you compare it, and it's going to tell you.
So it has a thumbnail guide of the forms.
Right.
So you're looking at the base of the arrowhead.
And the base is going to tell you what culture it is.
Yeah, and then once you find the culture,
you just flip over to it and
find the deal. But that's cool. Not that we need to go through all this at this point. There it is, Bulverde. Right. And so this is described as a G8, $55 to $100. That's amazing.
So the one you're holding there is a G3 or 4, and it's it's worth 50 cents. But to me, it's priceless.
So what's the G terminology?
That's going to tell you the grade of the point.
Got it.
So this point that's in the book, and the book we're talking about is the finest artifacts of prehistoric Texas. And a couple friends of mine wrote the book, Winston Ellison and Dwayne Rogers. What they did is they had a panel of judges, about 10 judges that looked at the best points that they could find, and then they voted on them to make the book or not. And so that's another book you guys ought to look for, is The Finest Artifacts of Prehistoric Texas by Winston Ellison and Dwayne Rogers.
Yeah.
So a lot of these points, Dwayne Rogers is the authenticator. There's people that will fake these and try to sell them. And so I know these are real because I found them.
Yeah.
And if I were to sell them, someone would probably want a paper on it, and that would be the guy, Dwayne Rogers. But of course, I wouldn't sell these things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the specifics. It's fun for me just to give people an outlet to what do you do if you find one. I'm sure that'd be a question. But back to what they mean, because I'm generally a ideological, philosophical type of guy, and even as a hunter, I've described this podcast a lot. I think more about the philosophies of why we do the things we do than I do the actual doing of them.
Yeah.
And so how to find one of these is relevant to me, but what they end up meaning to you is just as relevant, if not more so. And so do you have a piece in here that you found, like your first arrowhead or what you think the most prolific one you found that means a lot to you that would point out to folks?
Yeah.
What it is?
This point down there that my wife found when we were looking at so most of the ranch we live on, I grew up on, but there's another part of it that we bought that we added to. And when we were looking to buy it, before we had any money, we were just walking down through the pasture there near the creek, and right in the tire rut was a perfect point.
Wow.
And my wife found it, and she said, "Yes, it's meant to be. This is us. I mean, we're going to live here. This is our deal."
I thought you were about to say, then I dropped down on one knee.
Then I dropped down.
Will you marry me?
No, I was still real scared. No. I don't think we were married quite yet. But
I thought you had an arrowhead, an engagement arrowhead.
Yeah. So, but that one, and then that point that's 7.5 inches, I was by myself hand digging. That was before the machinery and all. And it's paper thin.
Beautiful.
And that's the one that's in the book here. But
beautiful. That's a beautiful piece right there.
Just the tip was sticking out, and I was like, oh, it's just one of these dart points, and 6 inches of it hanging out, and I almost fell over when I pulled it out.
Unbelievable. And to your best recollection, there's so many rabbit holes, so much stuff I'm interested to know.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Describe kind of the different points you found and how you go about identifying what it is and what it's used for. I mean, does each people have a different type of signifier? I mean,
yeah, so,
I know they do. You explained some of it to me, but try to take people through everything that's here and how it's identified.
Well, there are points that we call drills that are long, that essentially look like a drill.
Yeah, so you have three. I'll have some photos of this up. But you have three displays here. I'll just take you through the far left display is drills.
So the drill points, all of their base, or a lot of the bases tell you what type of point it is, what culture it was, how old was that culture. That's what the base signifies. So it's really easy to tell. I know most of them in the area. Whenever they come off the table, I grab it. I say, "There's a pernalis." We talk. My digging buddy and or family and I'd say, "That's cool. There's a Boulevardy, or there's a Casterville, or a Lang, or a Lang tree." And so the cultures that were here were the Pernalis culture and the Lang tree culture, and they're they're just giving them names because they were prehistoric.
Yeah.
So they're from tiniest little things called gravers, that have little tiny points on them, maybe to make jewelry with, to big knives that were most of these knives. And this is good that we're going to talk about this because someone sees a 7.5-inch knife and the first thing they say is spear, and they think of some Indian carrying a big spear and stabbing a guy. Well, back then, these cultures weren't at war with each other, so they're cutting grass with them. And the archaeologists have studied the wear patterns on the edges and found that the majority is fiber, cutting fiber. So they used a massive amount of grass in there to cook and to steam these acorns, and that's mainly what they ate is acorns and some meat. But then, so there's big knives, and then the dart points that would be used on the atlatl. Some of them are small because they've been resharpened multiple times, and some of them are.
So when you say small, about how long?
An inch and a half or an inch even.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how some of these, when you're showing dart points or even arrowheads, how small they actually are.
Yeah, there's some of these arrowheads. If you have a dime, you can fit 3 of them without any overlap.
Yeah.
And they're killing buffalo with them. A lot of people mistake it as, quote, bird points. But these are bison killers. Like I say, you put a few in and you have the luxury of tracking them. But so from knives to drills to big choppers, to do some major bone breaking because they would use that marrow, to real serrated edges so they could cut bone with, or I would imagine they'd cut a lot of stuff. And there's also what we found lots of jewelry, what we call gorgets, where they make them from slate and they have all kinds of awesome designs in them. Then the holes are inset. They'd wear them around their neck or pieces of jewelry that were sewn into clothes. All sorts of things. The little round balls, game pieces, we call them. They're in all the mounds around here. They're like marble, but they're made from limestone.
Wow.
Perfectly round little balls, just the size of a marble, that I'm sure that were used for game pieces.
What does that tell you about how they lived their lives? I mean, how do you imagine they gathered in a place? What did these ancient hunters, what did they prioritize? What did they look for in gathering? And then, you said there were small bands of people, 7, 8, 10, less than 10 people.
That's what they think. And I can imagine tons of time for the men to be hanging out in camp or on the hill, making these pieces, making their artifacts, it took a lot of effort to make these shafts on the atlatls. They'd kill a deer and they'd dry the meat, and that would get them through for quite a while. The ladies, I'm sure, would be out gathering firewood and acorns. And so lots of community time, but probably no sense of time.
Yeah.
And so they had a lot of time on their hands. I'm sure they did. And so if you could see, I used to think of these archaic folks as, just looking kind of drab, but some of the pieces that we found in these caves that have been preserved, the colors of their clothing, the jewelry they wore, I'm sure we'd be stunned at what we would see if we walked into a village of these guys.
Yeah, it's some pretty ornate stuff.
Yeah.
And there's, some of the jewelry you have here, you think, what?
Well, there's all kinds of...
Even the knives and the cutlery and things that they use.
Ochre is what we call it. They'd get limestone and they'd dye it and pack it together, and then, it can be, yellows and reds, and we find it all the time. And so they had a lot of color too.
Yeah. That was interesting how you talked about, how they ate and how they, gathered around these places, and what really how through finding their artifacts from their way of life, how you can really map out how they lived. in the micro sense and the macro sense, the sense that how they traveled and how nomadic they really were.
Well, if you hadn't seen when Shaki's over there and with the Maasai, sitting around that campfire and they're just talking about the ancient stories, and they're talking to each other, and they're not texting each other, or they're not, they don't have a TV tray sitting there staring at some senseless show. I mean, they're actually learning their culture, and I can see them just gathering around, talking about, laughing and talking about the day's hunt, and when so-and-so was about to shoot the deer and tripped, and, and they were laughing, and in a sense, the biggest worry was eating, but it was plentiful around there.
Yeah.
And you can survive on grasshoppers. I mean,
and they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny you said acorns. That was not something that I would have guessed.
Yeah. Lots of acorn ash. I mean, they've studied, of course, the archaeologists have studied the hearth, and it's just 85% acorns.
Wow.
Lots of grass seed. So they take the seeds and they'd grind them. Another deal that we hadn't talked about is they use grinding stones, these limestone grinding stones, and the grit that comes off of them and the teeth that we find in these, these skeletal remains that the archaeologists have come across, their teeth are worn down to the bone. And so lots of abscess, lots of death by their teeth. And it's funny, that's my profession.
I was going to say,
it's oral and maxillofacial surgery. So it's intriguing to me. The culture that, now that we're on teeth real quick, the Castile culture out there in West Texas, they would chew lechuguilla. They'd cook it and then chew the pulp out of it and spit those quids out. And that's what I was.
Yeah, you're showing me that earlier.
We have a lot of that here. But that had a lot of carbohydrate in it, and the skeletal remains, lots of decay.
Yeah.
Big evidence of big abscesses.
Oh, wow.
And so I imagine it was a terrible.
Well, you're saying there's a lot of bowel problems, a lot of gut problems, a lot of teeth problems, just unhealthy living.
Yeah. I mean,
that we can't imagine. There's no way I don't think there's any way that we can imagine that. And in a previous podcast, I can't remember which conversation it was, I talked about wanting to find, in the modern sense of the word, you and I both traveled to Nepal, and there's some similarities there, but in the modern sense of the word, someone that has to kill to live. The Discovery Channel loves to put on their, they killed your family, lives in Alaska and lives off the land, and they choose to live that way. Well, the rub there is they choose to live that way. If they wanted to get in a plane, fly into town, and have a hamburger, they could. They just choose to live off the land, which is admirable, but they still have a choice. And I know in this world there are many indigenous, the Chamane people that Steve Ranella has traveled and been around in South America. That are still living life with thinking about food as a necessity. They have to find it. They have to forage for it. They have to find it. They have to live off what's there. They have to. They don't choose to. There's no other way to do it. They have to harvest and kill everything to sustain their culture, to sustain their people, to sustain their own lives. And that mindset, to me, is one I would love to sit and explore as long as I could.
Yeah, that is something that's I can't imagine. When I was in the Arctic hunting muskox, one of my guides was born in an igloo. So we're not far removed from some of the people that actually get to talk about how that really is. I mean, the gravity that they feel, that they have to kill. But then again, what was it a huge deal to them, or would they be like, well, we're just not going to eat meat for a month, but we're going to be fine on acorns?
Yeah. How that sets up,
Yeah.
I always, you can read about this and study about this. I hope to do more, of course, but how, the spiritual nature of hunting worshiping the animal, worshiping the ground, worshiping the place you lived, and how that manifests itself is an interesting concept in and of that. Why was that happening? Was it happening because they felt that if they did that, that the natural world would then present them the opportunity to eat meat? Or did they do that because their worlds revolved around that animal so much so that it became a deity, or it spoke to them in such a way? So it's interesting to think about someone who's never known anything other than waking up and looking at the world around them and thinking about how they were going to sustain themselves. And we have no idea how that thinks or feels, as much as you and I have traveled to the end of the world to try to, at some level,
find it, right?
To find that feeling. We'll never know what the guy that made that arrow point in your hand felt like when he killed an animal, whether he felt pure joy because he knew that his people would be fed, or whether he felt some sort of sadness, or what connection he has to the animal.
Well, it's in your hunt in Nepal, you guys are talking about if you can kill an animal and not have any sense of remorse at all, then you want to sit in the tree a little bit longer and do a little bit of reflecting of some sort. But and again, is it killing or harvesting? We kill animals, and I have a great time doing that. I love to kill.
It's fun.
It is, but it's the DNA that we share with these guys.
Yeah.
And I respect the animals to a sense that you can see how I respect these animals out here. What I've provided these animals on this ranch, and we kill one. We kill one buck a year and 3 does, and it's just an amazing place for these animals to live.
Yeah.
So the respect.
Some level of just understanding this kind of tapestry of human life that we'll never know how they felt. Yeah. It's impossible to understand how they felt. And you have this is a buffalo hide on your wall behind you.
Yeah, it's a buffalo calf.
A buffalo calf hide. That is, it's just a tanned, poorly tanned hide, or an ancient.
It's from pre-reservation. You want me to talk about it?
Yeah, please do, because now I'm looking at it, I'm like, let's talk about this thing.
So this hide was found in upstate New York, a home built back in the 1700s that they were remodeling. And in the attic, it was an old military home. And in the attic, balled up in the corner, they found this. They rolled it out. And it's a war trophy from the Indian Wars, right before Little Bighorn. When they'd ran, the government would come in and they'd essentially destroy these villages, trying to wipe the Indians out. I mean, there's no other way, about it. That's what they were doing. They'd take the loot. They'd take all the stuff that's cool to them. It's just as cool to those guys as it is to us. They'd send it back east, and they would use, they call them war trophies. So anyway, this one survived, and it has about 15 different scenes of it's one battle depicted here of the Sioux fighting the Pawnee, and the brilliant colors and the artistry. It's these Indians riding the horses. Most of the Pawnee are on foot, and the Sioux warriors with their brilliant head dresses. Some of them had more feathers than others, and that depicted their social class there in the tribe. But they're having a full-on battle, no guns, all bow and arrow and lances. And it's just a piece of art that is extremely rare.
Yeah.
That by getting to know the people in the subculture world of artifacts that I was fortunate enough to come across, and now it's displayed in the Indian room.
Yeah, that's just amazing. I was looking at the I guess you call them illustrations, the depictions of what those supposed to look like, and it's such a striking, way to illustrate it.
It gives color to their. It's hard to look back in time and see it in color. It's like that country song Jamie Johnson sings. But anyway, it's hard to see that in color. You go back, that was a couple hundred years ago. You go back 8,000 years, or you go back to the Clovis culture, and it's not just buckskin, just one color. I mean, these guys had these brilliant shells that they were trading from the West Coast with inset stone, different types of turquoise and all inset. Just some amazingly ornate dresses, and with elk teeth, with 100 sets of bugling teeth on one elk skirt.
Unbelievable.
That the ladies wore.
Wow. Well, I've got a couple. Let's see if I can pull them up here. It's the first time I've ever kind of asked for some questions from past listeners about the topic. There's a few good ones here. We'll just do two of them. Chase Rutherford asked, well, we already kind of covered this, but it'd be interesting to go back over. Do you have any Clovis points, and what were they used for specifically? Let's talk about you said you've not found Clovis here at all?
I hadn't found Clovis here, but I
believe there to be Clovis.
Oh, absolutely. I've have some of my digging buddies have found Clovis, and the last one, a buddy had found one in Johnson City, which from the back roads here is about 15 minutes. So absolutely, there's Clovis sites, but the Clovis sites are so much harder to find because they didn't cook in this midden style camp.
Yeah.
And then they were just so nomadic. They may have been there for 3 nights and maybe left 2 Clovis points or none.
None, yeah.
And so a lot of the Clovis pickups are missed shots, or they shoot at something and they can't find their shaft, and then we find them. It may not necessarily, that's just a random find. And so the Clovis, they hunted mammoth. That's what the Clovis, Clovis, New Mexico, where they found that carcass, the mammoth carcass with 5 Clovis points in it. But I'm sure their Clovis cultures hunting armadillos with them, and deer and whatever else that they can throw at.
Yeah. What's the importance of I've heard and read a little about the Clovis culture. It seems like of those that know a little bit about ancient hunters, an important culture to know. Could you place that in a sense of time?
They're thought to be the first peoples of North America to inhabit North America, and that's why they're so important. And so they date back to 12,500 years ago, and they went extinct about 10,000 years ago. They went extinct with the bison and tickus here, which is a skull I'm pointing at. Buddy of mine has a big bison jump on his ranch in Wyoming.
Yeah, those are just
Frank Neville.
Ridiculous artifacts there. But yeah, okay.
So that's what they're hunting. They're hunting whatever they can eat. They're shooting them at turkeys.
Yeah,
they're just surviving. I mean, big time surviving.
Yeah,
and
that's good. Look up the Clovis culture if you don't know much about it. There's a lot of interesting books and things out there. I'll try to throw some links to some of my favorites.
The flute in the Clovis in the point is what's
let's get back to that
about that. It has a big flute that runs up the middle of it, where they would haft it, where the stick would go.
It's almost like a indentation.
Yeah, they'd bang a big channel of flint out of the middle of it.
Yeah,
and it'd make it thinner so they could put it down the shaft easier, and then they could use their sinew to tie it on in the asphaltum.
Yeah,
or the pine pitch.
The book here we're looking at, it's the Paleo period of the Clovis, 10,000 BC to 9,000 BC. Some of these points that are channeled out in the center, interesting looking.
But
pieces.
That's why he's asking about that's the find. I mean, you find a Clovis, whether it's broken or just the base or whatever, and you've
found something on this continent.
Yeah, that's the oldest people.
I think we're all collectively rooting for you to get pull a Clovis out.
I know. We just got to dig deeper.
We got the tools to do it.
Yes, sir.
Chris, I don't know how to say your last name. Sorry, Chris. Gleam, Gleim. Said, I'm really interested in the skills of our ancient hunting ancestors that they acquired and how those are passed on to us today, and how the use or misuse of them affects our everyday lives, specifically the skills.
Yeah, so I can just picture these guys. And a friend of mine who has this amazing collection of cave stuff has a whole collection of little kids' toys and bow and arrows made for little dolls that are like this, that are about 3 inches tied perfectly with all the
Whoa.
to scale, everything. And so while our kids are playing video games or jumping rope or whatever, they're playing shooting games with their atlatls.
Yeah, to learn.
Yeah. And they're, I'm sure we're picturing them sitting up over a great water source or a big, of the few trees, the oak tree that's dropping the acorns, and the deer they're up in the top and they're waiting on that deer to come in. And they're a lot more silent. They had to be. Their stalking abilities and their tracking abilities were, if you've been to Africa and seen the trackers there, it's just mind blowing what they can look out across 100 yards and see one blade of grass that's been over and know what direction or whatever. And see, these are things that
they read like the oxidation in the sand.
Exactly.
With old tracks.
Yeah, how many hours? And so these are things that we, with our awesome bows, don't need to learn. And so we don't. Most of us don't learn that. Even the most skilled hunters, bow hunters, the guys that are doing longbows and all that are amazing. But we're missing such a big piece of the
Well, I think about even your passion. Like if your passion was a river, the bigger this river gets, the more tributaries it has. So as you find more heads and get more passionate and dig deeper, you have to almost by proxy learn about the natural world here, the trees, the rock, what type of rocks are in the ground, what type of soil, what to look for, in that soil. And so you, like you said, become an amateur archaeologist just by the passion where it leads you. As that, the river of your passion gets bigger, it's going to branch off into other knowledge bases you might not have if you didn't love hiding arrowheads.
Right. I totally agree. And and back to his point on the skills and all, it takes just a few, 10% of the knowledge that a hunter has to kill a big elk. If you're willing to get off the couch, you can go find one and shoot through your scope, and he's dead.
Yeah.
But you missed, where was that elk last night, and what path was he on, and what was he eating, and where do I need to set up, and where do I need to set my next camp?
Yeah.
For my family to live 3 more months, knowing the way that the elk travel this certain time of year, and there's so much stuff that we're missing that we don't need, but would be awesome to know.
Yeah.
And that's an awesome question. That question right there, you could sit around here and have a drink and talk for hours about.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many. When I was the editor of Peterson's Hunting Magazine, or one of the editors, we always every year did like an old school issue where we would celebrate some sort of old school thing. But our old school was like, the 80s. In the 70s, what did they do? We never thought to, or I haven't seen anybody think to really look hard at how these ancient hunters lived their lives and why they lived the way they did, and how they, we're talking thousands and thousands of years here, where you've got from the Clovis people to the Folsom people, such an evolution in the human body, the human brain, the human ability, that we can't conceive of that. So you're now, 1,000 years later, we're looking at, in the Paleo period, Folsom points, which are much more diminutive, still ornate almost in the way that they were.
Oh, incredibly.
When they were made.
So even the older there's some old timers around here that you find a crude arrowhead and they're like, oh, that's old. No.
Yeah.
The really old stuff is the stuff that is truly a work of art.
And it seems like you're looking at the Folsom people here in 9,000 BC, or even back over to the Clovis people, and they're the first few people in 7,000. These are, if somebody handed that to you today, you would say you would want to put it in a case, even if you didn't know what it was. It's such a beautiful piece of stone.
I did find a plain view, which is 8,000 BC, when I was hunting antelope with Phil out in New Mexico.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And it's in it. I left it on the ranch,
It's beautiful. These beautiful pieces. Yeah. And it as rudimentary as it is, it doesn't seem that way to look at these photos. The beautiful photos in this book.
You can't hardly machine these
No.
any better. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
And so the credit that I give these ancient people now as to where, seeing them in black and white back when I was growing up, these people were amazing people. And I'd love to hang out with them.
Yeah.
I love them.
Yeah.
I do. I mean,
yeah.
I love their culture. I just, that's what's the driving force in all this.
Yeah. Well, and it's, I've come to appreciate perspectives of all kinds. And the reason why we record these conversations is to try to introduce your perspective to other people. Right. And then maybe it's something you've said during this conversation can help change the way that they think about our history as hunters, or why hunting might be important to them. And they're not even really sure about how to break that down in their own minds. Like, your love for these ancient people goes way beyond just possessing the things they made one time.
You know what's crazy about it is the schools don't even teach this stuff at all. They're this is some of the more interesting, being in this country now. When we were talking about earlier, I'm getting ready to leave Texas, probably for good, and move to Montana, set up home up there. And then part of thinking about my leaving here, because my son was born here, so it's an important place for me. And part of my leaving here was trying to figure out how to have conversation with people like yourself that born, raised, grew up, and have this intense appreciation for the natural world here. Because as different as Montana and Texas are, they both have their own stories. Mm-hmm. And if you live in a place and don't know the story, the history of the place where you live, start reading, because having like family connection you have to this ground, but then also the connection to the ancient humans, that's pretty unique. Yeah, it's
special.
Awesome.
And something that nobody can duplicate that. You can't duplicate that by going to the Smithsonian and looking around the connection you have to these heads in this place.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great.
Well, we love it, man. We love it.
Well, and it comes across, your kids are awesome running around finding arrowheads.
The kids.
So your oldest daughter is going with you to the Brooks Range, do you tell me?
Going to the northern part of the Brooks Range, a part that just recently opened to hunting. Our guide has that big new concession up there, and lots of sheep. She'll be 10 next August, and my dad took my brother and me when I was 10 and he was 12 to the Brooks Range, and we both got caribou and doll sheep. And it's so my daughter's, she's like, all right, well, when I'm 10, we're going, aren't we? I was like, you betcha.
Your daughters are great. Yeah, you raised them to be brave young ladies. And that's awesome. I started hunting when I was 11, I think, maybe. And I was just shooting spikes on in Maryland, but you've traveled the world. Yeah, made it to Nepal.
Yes.
I don't know how many of us Nepal hunters there are. I guess Nepal hunters.
Well, they only have 20 tags a year,
and it was closed for a decade, if not longer, with their Civil War.
You got to that Nepal deal is pretty special. I mean, you have to really want to challenge yourself and to get out and
I mean, you went last year. Well, not last year.
Got back
in
April.
A year after I went. If you've not heard the podcast I did with Cole Kramer on the subject, you should listen to it. So I won't retell my story anymore. But how'd you find going to Nepal? I mean, it's like I said, there's a rare group till now that have gone that can tell stories, but I'm sure more people will go in the future.
So it was amazing to get to be in the Himalayas, to be at 18,000 feet. So when we went, we thought that the snowpack was going to be heavy and we'd be hunting sheep at 12 to 14,000. And we show up and I could tell the guide was dodging the question when we got off the airplane. And finally he's like, look guys, no snow, not much snow this year. You're going to be hunting at 18,000 feet every day. And the worst part about it was Kathmandu flu.
Yeah.
I got it too. Ben had it pretty bad.
Woo! Yeah, at least we can sit and have whiskey and talk about Kathmandu flu, man. That just means like, oof. We were talking about that place I'll stop interrupting your story, but the place is just in the Western sense of the feeling, an assault on your body. The air quality, the food quality, just everything is assaulted. Then when you get to 18,000 feet, your entire, your circadian rhythms are being assaulted by the way you sleep.
Well, we were, we get up to 16,000 and the guides are like, here's some sheep. And I'm like, well, where's the rock? I got diarrhea bad. And so, man, it was 3 days eating rice. And thank God I brought some heater meals. I read an article that said bring some in. I brought so we could have some spaghetti or something or whatever, just enough to survive. But we were going along there at one point. My hunting buddy, I looked at him and he looked like hell. And I said, Kurt, you all right, man? He goes, Russell, I'm just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And I could see that he was not joking. And he's like, we made it to that day, and in camp that night, he goes, I swear to God, I thought we were going to have to call in a dang helicopter or something to save me.
It's good to hear that.
But he killed a huge sheep.
I know it. Like the biggest sheep I've ever seen. Although, when we went there, we didn't see that many because we were struggling to get close to them. But yeah, that's probably a whole nother podcast about a journey like that. But it's cool to see somebody like yourself that is able to do this at home and still travel and do those things and bring your kids along. I mean,
I was bringing arrowhead with me when I go. That when I was at the Hickory, that the grinding stone there, the cool deal about that was talking to a true Apache, my good buddy now, Bernard Inez. Man, just getting to hear that side of things. But anyway, we can go down all kinds of different deals. But talking to our guide in Nepal around camp about his culture and what artifacts are they finding and all. And I brought home a 50-year-old knife that was used in their camp that's just archaic and just total badass. Yeah. Chopped up shocky sheep. Chopped up one of the big.
You get a 50-year-old knife that chopped up Jim Shockey's blue sheep.
I got it. I asked him for it, and he said, you're going to respect it and your passion for it, dude. To take it home and display it and tell people about Nepal.
Yeah. Well, that's it too. I mean, we get caught up in this idea that, going over to Nepal might be some trophy hunt where you're just looking to bring back the antlers or the horns in this case and tell everybody how great you are by doing it. But it means so much more as a person to venture over there and do that, and to know in the going that the animal will be consumed in its totality. That's a huge part of it, of course, but to see the artifacts you brought back, and we were comparing stories about what I brought back, what you brought back, and the respect we have for those people and the culture and the chance to go and do that. I mean, any pushback someone might give you, especially the way that you've displayed your hunting life and artifact life here in this room, is preposterous. Not that there's anybody that ever has challenged my going to Nepal or yours, but just to say, like, for proof positive of respect for culture, respect for animals, respect for people. It's here, man. It's in the walls.
Yeah, it is. It's cool. We love it.
We do. Well, that's good. Good hour and a half. It's good to end on the fact that you take these arrowheads to the places you go and give them to the people that you meet. I think that's a damn good way to bring Texas to. Texas. It'll be fun for me because you gave me a nice display of arrowheads from your ranch here, so I'm going to take those to Montana and display them.
Yeah, it'll be cool in the office. Real cool.
They're real cool. Well, thank you, Russell.
All righty.
See ya. That's it. That's all. Episode number 25 is in the books. Russell Cunningham, thank you for letting us into your home and letting us into your life to hear about you and your family and what you do. Russell did ask me after the fact to explain to everybody that in Texas, on your own private property, you can dig and keep these artifacts that we spoke of in the podcast. So in a lot of the other states, that is not the case. But here in Texas, that is. So just want to make that clear that Russell is respectful of the land and of the history of the place and understands what he's doing here in Texas, finding artifacts. And so hopefully you learned a little bit about the history of this place and some of the hunting cultures that called this place home. So that's it for number 25. Number 26 is coming up next. Number 26 is going to be with a fairly special man. That man is Eddie Reese. Coach Eddie Reese. Eddie Reese is the winningest NCAA coach of all time. He is the head swimming coach for the last, since 1979 at least. So however many years that is. The head swimming coach of the University of Texas. Eddie's a hunter. Eddie has used hunting in his past to help train Olympic athletes who get gold medals, and is somebody who values his time outside. So he's another extraordinary man, 77 years old. We're going to hear from him next time on the Hunting Collective. Till then, go to the website, hit us up, and tell us how we did. And keep listening, keep enjoying the conversation. Keep praising, and keep telling us how we can get better. See ya.
You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.